Tappei has just released Arc 7 Chapter 6, so this will be a summary for that chapter. Also, if you haven't already, check out my summary for Arc 7 Chapter 5, linked above. The chapter starts with another flashback. Subaru is asking Otto what his worst day as a trader was. Otto, confused by the question, says that it isn't really a great thing to ask someone. We find out that Subaru and Garfiel were talking about it and wanted to know how Otto coped when he was a merchant, since his role was to be alone, so he had no one with him and no one to talk to. Otto explains that he wasn't truly alone due to the fact that he had his ground dragon with him and he could talk to the ground dragon using his divine blessing. We see that Otto is in his office and that Subaru is actually with Garfiel and they're playing Shatranj, which is essentially chess, and Subaru is winning. However, Otto from his position gave Garfiel a tip which gets Garfiel in the lead. Garfiel was the one who was really interested in travelling alone, since he was the person who was confined to this sanctuary, so there's much he can actually go out and do and see in the world out there. Otto states that Garfiel could support himself and defend himself, whereas someone like Subaru couldn't, which causes Subaru to react negatively. We see that Otto did this because Garfiel is reserved, so he needs compliments to be pushed forward, whereas Subaru gets carried away, so Otto reins him in. Subaru then thinks to himself that if someone was to ask everyone in the camp who was the most dangerous enemy, everyone would say that it's Otto. We see Otto's bad situation, the fact that he was captured and tied up, and how he was prepared for death. Garfiel states that he wouldn't let Otto get into another situation like that again, and Otto compliments him. Otto again gives Garfiel another tip on where to move his piece, essentially causing Garfiel to win the match and Subaru losing. Subaru howls in defeat, and the scene changes. The scene switches back to Subaru. We again see him reflect on the flashback, and he can actually relate to Otto because Subaru is now tied up and he's prepared for death. Subaru is in a camp with various tents and a lot of racks of armor and weapons which are ready to be worn. The camp has many people, humans and demi-humans. Subaru asked the person with him what happened to the girls. The person was wondering why Subaru was wondering about the girls and questioned whether or not those girls were actually the most important to Subaru rather than someone like himself. We see that Subaru is with two people, the violent man from last chapter and an orange-haired young man. Subaru sees that the young man is wearing light armor, which makes him a warrior rather than a knight. Someone like Julius is a knight, meaning that they need not only be strong, but also win the hearts of the people. This man was a warrior, which means that strength is what mattered. Subaru again asked him whether or not the girls were okay, and the man responded that they were both fine. Subaru retorts saying to stop giving half answers, and that lumping them together was not good because Subaru only cared about the blue-haired girl, and didn't care about the blonde one. This causes the man to respond that Subaru is heartless. Subaru wanted to know why he was separated from them if they were all prisoners. We see that the young man with orange hair wants to question Subaru, and that Subaru can meet Rem and Lewis if he answers some questions. And we see that Rem and Lewis are in jail. Subaru asked why they were doing this, which caused them to be hit from behind by the violent man. And the violent man then stomped on Subaru's broken fingers, stating that Subaru needs to realize his position and that he's a prisoner, so he shouldn't be talking back. The young man with orange hair tells the violent man to stop. Now keep in mind, I'm not sure if these names are correct, but the orange-haired man is called Todd and the violent man is called Jamal. Todd states that Jamal and his squad found Subaru, Rem and Lewis, but Rem awoke earlier than Subaru did, and in her injured state, she pretty much soloed all of Jamal's squadron before being taken down, which caused him to have a negative repercussion, hence why he's super hostile to Subaru. Subaru asks Todd to get to the point, and Todd wants to know whether or not Subaru is Sudrakian, and of course, Subaru is confused. Todd states that they are looking for the Sudrakian people and that they're located in the forest of Budheim and that it would take years for them to search the whole forest. Due to Subaru answering the questions, he's permitted to see Rem and Lewis. He was picked up so that he could walk in small steps and he was taken out into the camp. This was essentially a camp for war with a wooden perimeter around it, and Todd asks about the knife Subaru had. Subaru thought about the man in the forest. Maybe he was one of the people that Todd was looking for, however Subaru couldn't betray him. After all, the man gave Subaru helpful advice to catch Rem and also gave Subaru the knife to cut his way through the forest. Todd, confused about Subaru's silence, asks again, and Subaru states that it's a family heirloom. Todd reveals that the emblem on the sword is evidence that Subaru must be nobility and given it by the Emperor. The emblem on the sword is the crest of the sword wolf. Subaru was shocked, but he looked around the camp and saw it, the crest of the sword wolf. Subaru had realized he had been sent south of the border. He was in the Wallachian Empire. Subaru thought to himself that just like in the games, empires seem to be evil. Subaru realized that in a place where the strong rise and the weak are oppressed is the worst place for someone like him. People, upon seeing the crest, shouted "Hail Wallachia!" which caught Subaru by surprise. With this, Subaru realized that he had to keep it secret that he was from Lagunica. Since Subaru was Emilia's knight, and she was a candidate for the throne, it could get messy. Subaru knew the history of Lagunica and Wallachia, and wondered whether or not he should say he was Wallachian or Lagunican nobility. Subaru again reconfirmed that he had to keep it secret, thanking that Rem had amnesia so she couldn't reveal the truth. Todd asked if Subaru's legs were broken or hurt since Subaru stopped walking during this, and Subaru said he was shocked by the chanting of Hail Wallachia. Either way, Subaru pressed onwards and found Rem locked away and wanted to know if she was safe, but again, Rem was hostile to him. Subaru was released from his restraints, and it's explained that a lot of different camps are searching through the forest for these people that are hiding. Therefore, if Subaru and Rem and Lewis went in a different direction, they were gonna be caught anyway and interrogated. Todd states that a supply convoy is coming and that Subaru and the group should travel with them back to a nearby town. Rem seems content with going along with Subaru for now, and Todd asks what their relationship is. Subaru states that Rem is precious to him, and as for Lewis, she's a stranger. Subaru doesn't want to consider Lewis as a companion, and is thinking of leaving her somewhere for the Wallachian Empire to have. With that stated, Subaru wondered where Lewis was, and Todd said that she was being treated since she cut her head when she jumped into the river, so she was being treated for that. After hearing this, Subaru immediately wanted to know where Lewis was being healed, and Todd stated it was in a tent with a red flag. Subaru sprinted, pushing Todd out of the way, stating that they were all going to die. Todd was confused but stated he would follow Subaru. Subaru thought about the worst possible result of Lewis being healed, the resurrection of the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. Subaru knew that if Lewis was resurrected, Rem, Subaru, and the rest of the camp would get annihilated if she went back to normal. As Subaru rushed to the tent, he heard shouting and was knocked to the floor. It turned out Subaru was knocked to the floor by Lewis in question, who had a bandaged head. It wasn't a magical treatment, it was simply a medicinal treatment, using herbs and other things. Subaru lamented at his misfortune and stated that at least he was still alive. Todd joked, commenting on the fact that Subaru's bar was set really low. Either way, Todd stated that the manpower of the camp isn't high, and Subaru understands his meaning, stating that those who don't work, don't eat. Todd was happy with Subaru's response, and Todd nodded his head, which caused Lewis to also nod her head, as if copying Todd, and the chapter ends there. So my thoughts on the chapter is that I do believe Lewis is being redeemed. Like, I know a lot of people don't like that, but the fact that she's starting to imitate people, she's also not as hostile. She's like standing around, she's replicating people. She isn't like an animal anymore, at least from the looks of the chapter. So I do feel like Lewis is going to start to become an actual person, and we're going to see the parallel between the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony Lewis and the Lewis that we see Subaru grow up with. Apart from that, I'm glad that Subaru, Rem, and Lewis are all safe. This Todd person seems like a proper bro, and there's a lot more about these Shudrak people. I'm not sure if that's the correct translation, but we'll find out more about it. Look forward to my theory about Vincent being the masked person. I'm going to make a video on that. But apart from that, nothing much I can really say, but let's see how it goes.